The Chargers are headed into their preseason finale, and on today's show, we're going to talk about all of the guys who have one last chance to make the roster.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 8 seasons, but this is our 6th year as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen today, and to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Today, Daniel, it is the eve of the last preseason game, the last opportunity for the guys on the back end of the roster to put their best film on tape for those coaches to go make this 53-man roster.
And that's what this is all about, right? I don't see a lot of starting positions or any starting positions really up for grab in this one, but the truth is, Brandon Staley said it. I mean, there are still kind of roster spots on the line, and this is a showcase for these guys to be able to go out there and show, hey, you can't keep me off this 53-man roster. But today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. David, I want to start this with the defensive line. I mean, there's so many places we could go with this. The running back battle, can Elijah Dotson make this squad right? John Hightower, can he somehow get back what he had early on in camp, and so much more. But I think on the defensive line, there's a ton of competition. And I'm going to start with the guys that we feel are safe. I think right now, 5 guys are roster locks for this squad. And I think it's Sebastian Joseph-Day, Austin Johnson, Morgan Fox, and Scott Matlock. And then you have Nick Williams. And I think he's the one we haven't talked about much. He's a veteran that was brought in the offseason. I believe it's his 11th season in the league. And the reason we think he's safe, 0 snaps so far in the preseason. If you don't play at all, they don't really need to see anything from you. You're probably safe to make the squad. Last year, they kept 6, and we talked about 5 being safe. And I think right now, David, on the bubble, you have guys like Christopher Hinton, David Moa, and Jerrod Clark with one last chance to kind of show what they have.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot of spots available on this roster. This Chargers roster is stacked. I mean, at every single position, there's only 1 or 2 spots here or there, and the defensive line, the back end of that rotation is definitely one of those spots where there's a ton of competition with guys that are really having a lot to play for in this game. Guys like Jerrod Clark, Christopher Hinton, David Moa, all these guys should go into this game expecting to at least have an opportunity to make this roster. I mean, there is a legitimate chance. I think we probably feel like Christopher Hinton has a leg up. I mean, and he's performed well this offseason. I feel like you look at his grades, it's pretty even. 73.9 run defensive grade. Provided 3 tackles, 2 of those went for stops, and also had a couple of hurries and a sack. So a pretty well-rounded performance for Christopher Hinton. And also, obviously, he has the leg up because he's played with the Chargers before. So I think, he's probably the guy that's, in that spot and has that spot to lose, but that doesn't mean that he can't lose it, and these other guys can't go out there and have a great performance and potentially take that spot.
At least as we see it now, right? Yeah. I mean, we don't know where the preference is by the coaching staff. I mean, at least from rotations, it felt like Christopher Hinton was the guy that was getting in there first, probably followed by David Moa, and then followed by Jerrod Clark. But I think the interesting thing to me is if that spot does go to Christopher Hinton, right, who has experience playing against NFL teams, was on the team last year for a little while, the other 2 guys are almost definitely fighting for a practice squad spot. And then there's David Moa, right? And the interesting thing about David Moa is I think it's really a conversation of how much do you value the preseason and how much do you value training camp? Because he is a guy that has looked really good throughout camp, looked good in a very limited stint last year with the Chargers down the stretch when they really need a defensive lineman and showed some things.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, David, I think there are some problematic parts because I don't know if all of the training camp practices have really translated into actual production to feel good about in the games.
Yeah, I think for David Moa, just one of the things you look at, looking at the stats is there's not really much pass rush there for him. I mean, he had 41 rushing snaps, and he did not generate a single pressure among those snaps. So that is definitely a little bit problematic. I think he's a guy, and defensive line, you can't always look at the stats just by how they play because, it just brings me back to Braden Fehoko's interview. It's just you just don't know what they are being asked to do, right? You don't know the job that they are being brought in for. So you have to look at the effort. You have to look at, how they're impacting the game. I feel like David Moe has done a pretty good job of impacting the game from his perspective. But I think in this last preseason game, he still has work to do. I still feel like he has to come out with a strong performance if he wants to be a guy that's considered for this team or for this practice squad, because that's still very, very important.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how many people they keep on the practice squad, right? Because that also will have an impact on it. But yeah, I mean, he had 38 defensive snaps at the end of last year, so that buys him something. Doesn't buy him everything, but at least with what he's been able to do at training camp, does buy him a shot going into this last game to make a lasting impression that potentially can get him or keep him with this team for longer. And that's what this game is all about for these guys, the second and third string guys. Then there's Jerrod Clark, and he's probably the most interesting of the group, David, because so far, out of all the interior defensive linemen that have played in the preseason so far, he's number 27 in run defense grade, which, I mean, there's like 200 some guys. So, I mean, that's not bad at all. Top 10 percentile. If you're looking at guys that have played at least 10 snaps at that position, he's 16th. So he's up there. He's been a menace in the run game, fourth highest run stop percentage of anyone with at least 10 snaps. And he's just second out of all interior defensive linemen with 6 solo tackles already in the preseason. So this is an interesting case, David, because he's a guy as an undrafted free agent who was projected to be around a 7th round pick. I think he was a highly coveted undrafted free agent, and now has a chance going into this last game, if not for a roster spot, because we don't know, maybe he's already out of the roster spot contention. We don't know how they feel, but it feels like, I would like to see them give him a chance to make the practice squad.
Yeah, he's a guy I'm rooting for. He's a guy I want to see do well because I like the profile that he brings to the table. This guy is massive. I think he's 340 plus pounds. He's a guy who eats up double teams. He's a guy that can defeat double teams. He's just a guy you just don't want to run at. And so I like the upside. I mean, 3 pressures and 46 pass blocking snaps. That's not horrible for an interior defensive lineman. Maybe you would want a little bit more, but I think that's something that can come with time and training, time on task with NFL coaches and being with those guys. I think that's something that can definitely translate a little bit later on, but he brings that run stopping ability right away. He brings that size to the table right away. And so I've always liked the idea of having a bigger interior defensive line, a guy that's just somebody you have to try to get out of the way, a guy who kind of intimidates offensive linemen. So I wouldn't mind it. I'd like to see Jerrod Clark do well, and if not, maybe he can find himself on the practice squad because I like the upside that he brings.
And just because he's on the practice squad doesn't mean he's not going to have a role for this team this year, right?
That's 100% correct.
Look back at last year at Braden Fehoko, right? As soon as he made the 53-man roster, as soon as that happened, the Chargers re-signed Christian Covington and sent him back down to the practice squad, right? Or he ended up re-signing with the Chargers practice squad.
Yeah.
He ended up playing in a lot of games last season.
Yeah.
Michael Bandy, Jason Moore got snaps as practice squad players getting pulled up to the big league team, right?
Yep.
Raheem Lane, another guy that made it to the active roster. And now with the new practice squad rules, if you have a situation where you're going up against a really run-heavy team and you need somebody who's going to clog a hole, feels like Jerrod Clark could kind of be that guy, whereas David Moa, maybe throughout camp, has shown he's more the well-rounded guy and has a little bit of NFL experience so far. And I know a lot of people are probably wondering, what about CJ Okoye? Because he has been the story of training camp so far. Player who had never played organized football before this season, before his very first preseason game, goes and gets a sack. Has had moments in both preseason games, but we talked about it the other day. The most likely outcome from him, he gets waived. He comes back to the Chargers on the practice squad. They use an exemption on him to keep him with the squad, but the exemption in the extra spot on the practice squad means he won't be able to play for the Chargers or any other NFL team in 2023. That's the catch. But to get that guy in your program for a whole year, to be able to let him season, right, and knowing he's not there right now, absolutely. You reassess last year. You keep that guy in the building some way, and I think that's absolutely still in the cards for CJ Okoye, and he should get a lot more snaps in this upcoming game. But another guy who's going to be trying to crack this roster, David, is Elijah Dotson. And if he, going based on the preseason week 1, it was almost like, wow, this guy is really going to make himself undeniable to make this team. Comes back to earth in week 2, and I think the other big thing about the running backs in this game is, will we see Isaiah Spiller or Joshua Kelly play? Because that's something we don't really know at this point, and that could give us a little tip as to where the Chargers think they're at with that running back 2 conversation. So we're going to get into all that coming up right after this. First, though, I do need to tell you guys about the Game Time app because buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. And that's why if I ever need tickets, I go and use the Game Time app. Game Time is the fast and easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. Every day I look at my Game Time app, I see super cheap tickets to the Padres game, and I usually decide it's just not worth it for my emotional health. But sometimes I do, and the tickets are great, and the tickets are always cheap, and they always have killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're going to have because Game Time is the place for last-minute ticket deals. Be spontaneous. Go do something fun. The Game Time guarantee also means that you'll get the best price if you find tickets in the same section and a row. For less, Game Time will credit you 110% the difference. You will make money if you find it cheaper, and it's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. So snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. David, there are a lot more players we need to talk about that have a lot going into this last game to be worried about or,
Yes,
really
sir.
to be excited about, right? One final showcase, one final chance for these guys to put their stamp on a preseason and really put their best foot forward as far as trying to make this team. So I want to talk about running backs because there is one guy named Elijah Dotson who kind of lit the NFL on fire in week one because he averaged 15 yards a carry, 6 carries, 92 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 35-plus yard touchdowns. But then he came back down to earth. Last week, has a bad drop, right? He had 3 targets, 0 receptions. Didn't look as good in the running game, even though I didn't think he was bad. But this one, I think, has a lot to do with roster construction too, David, because I think it has a lot to do with whether the Chargers will keep 4 running backs or not and keep somebody after Isaiah Spiller and Josh Kelly.
Yeah, it definitely has a lot to do with it. And I think, after the first preseason game, you were trying to figure out how you were going to keep Elijah Dotson on the roster. But
I was so ready to be on that hype train.
Yeah, I mean, it's always fun to get excited about somebody who, performs and goes crazy. But the thing about the preseason is you got to show that consistency. You got to be able to go out there every single game and perform. And, I think in the first preseason game was like, wow, okay, that's impressive.
Put his name on the map.
Can he replicate that? Can he do that again? I mean, that's because once is great, but it could be an anomaly, and that's why you got to see it again before you can believe it. And then again, I think in the second preseason game, he didn't have a ton of room, and there was a lot of pressure from the Seattle Seahawks.
The Saints, yeah.
The Saints.
Well, and there's also
Saints
they were
getting
down
tons
by
of
the
pressure.
time he came in too, right? Like they were down big, and it turned into a different kind of game where they couldn't just run the ball at will because they were trying to win, right?
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, not a great performance from him. But Dotson has a lot to play for in this game. I feel like he still has an opportunity. I don't know, honestly, if the Chargers are probably going to keep 4 running backs at this point. I think it would be difficult.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be difficult. But I mean, it's up to him. It's up to him to force the decision. It's up to him to make it a very, very difficult one. He has the opportunity. I feel like he's going to be able to play a lot. He's going to get the chance to play a lot. So we'll see what he's able to do.
Last year, the Chargers kept 4 running backs on their opening roster, opening 53-man. And they end up releasing Larry Roundtree right away and signing Sony Michel. And then Larry Roundtree went to the practice squad, ended up coming back later, after Sony Michel got released. But if you're going to keep 6 receivers, for example, right, where last year you only kept 5, if you're going to keep a 4th tight end, whereas last year you only kept 3, that's got to come from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So trying to make this work, I mean, takes away from other positions as well, which is an important part of the conversation. But I think another thing I'm going to be watching for in this game is if we see Isaiah Spiller and Josh Kelly at all. So do you think we're going to see them? I mean, obviously both guys are going to make the team at this point, so you're not really trying to decide that. But if the Chargers feel, hey, this competition's still going, can somebody get some more separation in this game? How do you think it plays out?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I went back and forth with. I wasn't 100% sure. Yeah, I mean, it was something I didn't feel concrete about. But then I thought to myself, like, for Isaiah Spiller in particular, last year was a pretty tumultuous rookie season for him. I mean, it did not go well. I mean, he dealt with injuries, didn't really get on the field. I mean, it just wasn't a great,
had like 20 carries,
great start. Right, he didn't really play at all. So I think the touches are important for him. I mean, I do. Now, with that being said, I don't think that either of these guys play longer than a quarter.
If they play, yeah.
If they play at all. I just think that you don't want them to get killed behind, a backup offensive line, guys that are going to be playing for most of this game that probably not going to make the roster. So it's just, I don't know if I want to put my two guys that I know are going to make the team, I know are going to be part of the offensive plan this year, in too much jeopardy.
Yeah, it's interesting because you know how you feel about both of them at the very least at this point. And it feels like a battle to me that's probably going to carry over into the regular season.
I agree.
It's like these guys are both going to get carries early on.
Yeah, who's going to be the hot hand?
Real NFL talent. Yeah, maybe one of those guys can have a firmer grasp on it. But Joshua Kelly, very important special teams player. Isaiah Spiller, obviously someone that, hey, if he's RB2, do you give him a chance to go get hurt in this game? Very legitimate questions because they don't really need to see them. But if you're still trying to figure out who you want to be that second guy after Austin Eckler, you might want to see them out there for a quarter potentially. But I want to talk about another guy that has a chance to make this Chargers roster, and it has a lot to do with roster construction as well as Stone Smart. And I don't know if he is really battling Hunter Camp Moyer in this one. It feels like he's separated himself in that conversation. But the Chargers only kept 3 tight ends in 2022. And unfortunately, David, to me, it doesn't feel like Trey McKitty's going to get cut after his, only 2 years.
Yeah, it doesn't feel that way. But honestly, they should take a pretty long look at it just because I haven't seen anything that would suggest that he is taking a step forward, at least so far in this training camp in this preseason. Still issues with blocks, still not that productive running routes and catching passes. There's just not a lot there for me. For Stone Smart, though, there's a lot of optimism. There is a lot of people talking very highly, including Kellen Moore. He said, I thought the New Orleans game was an awesome game for him. The contested catch down the middle of the field where he took the hit and catching that was phenomenal. Really excited about with where he is going. So when your offensive coordinator is talking about you like that, that's a very, very good thing for you. So I think Stone Smart, after coming off of a very good performance in the second preseason game, if he's able to replicate that, then I think he's got a real chance. I think he's very, very close to this 53. I think he just needs one more way to be able to stamp it and make it official.
Yeah, and show that he can bring something on special teams as well. Yeah. Because if you're the fourth guy at any position, that's going to be a big part of it. And I think
definitely
the hard thing with Trey McKitty is really, he was a guy that you brought in to be a run-blocking tight end. And if you have Stone Smart and Gerald Everett and Donald Parham, only one of those 4 guys was brought in to be that, right? Like Gerald Everett's, I think, more well-rounded than people think he is. Or that
definitely he is.
But Donald Parham's not really that guy. Stone Smart, as a former quarterback and wide receiver, still kind of getting his body there, but doesn't have a ton of experience as an inline blocker just at the end of the line of scrimmage. So feels like Trey McKitty's safe, but it's hard because even though you want him to be that blocking tight end, he just hasn't been able to do it. And Brandon Staley said basically for him in this game, this is a huge test for him against athletic linebackers and a good defense for him to go out there and show what he can do, and he absolutely will be playing. So it'll be interesting to see those guys. Real quick, let's get to Keelan Doss versus John Hightower, because this is an interesting one, David, because John Hightower, kind of like Elijah Dotson at one point, was the camp darling and a guy that looked like he was going to be impossible to keep off this team. Yeah. And then he gets injured, and Keelan Doss has kind of just been that steady guy who has been, providing and producing every week.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's what I was going to say is just like you have the guy who's capable of the spectacular, of making the big, deep, crazy explosive plays like he did, catching more touchdowns than anybody else in training camp, up to this point. But then you deal with an injury, and then the injury that's, in this situation, that's going to derail you. And for Keelan Doss, availability is one of the best abilities. And not only that, but he's been rock steady, producing solid in each of the games. First game, 3 catches on 4 targets, 39 yards, a long of 28. Second game, 3 catches on 5 targets, 42 yards, a long of 23. So Keelan Doss is there, and he's producing week after week. So if he does that again, then I think it's hard to deny. I mean, it's hard to deny him in that spot. But I think John Hightower has a chance, but he has to really, really go off in this game and really show the Chargers why he deserves to be that last guy on that wide receiver depth chart.
Well, John Hightower has only had one chance in the preseason, and it came off as a dud, right? I mean, I think 5 or 6 targets. He only had 1 catch for 10 yards in that game, and Keelan Doss outproduced him. The other thing is, though, John Hightower has the speed that Keelan Doss doesn't have. And the other part of this conversation is the reason we're talking about these guys battling for this spot is because Jalen Guyton still hasn't come back off the PUP list after his torn ACL in 2022. So If you're looking for a Jalen Guyton replacement, John Hightower fits that mold more closely.
Yeah.
But Keelan Doss has just been plugging away, man, and he's made plays when I've been out there at practice. He's continued to make plays in the preseason. At the very least, I think these guys are on the practice squad, almost without a doubt, and you'd still feel better about them than bringing up someone like Jason Moore or Michael Bandy. So
that's for sure.
I think both of these guys have a future with this team. And at the same time, both of these guys could not make the team. And that's what's going to be so interesting about this last game, because it does feel like this is going to have, that's going to carry some weight when these final decisions come down the pike. But I do have a couple more guys, because the fourth safety spot still feels very up for grabs with Mark Webb and Raheem Lane. Neither one of them really taking that position by storm, right? And I think both of them had mistakes. Both of them had their moments. And there's one battle, David, that we thought was over, but Brandon Staley said is not over, and that's the battle between Cameron Dicker and Dustin Hopkins, which he says is still very much alive. So we're going to get into that coming up right after this. David, we've talked about a lot of positions, but one of the biggest ones that we feel like is up for grabs still is Raheem Lane and Mark Webb for that fourth safety spot. So we know it'll be interesting to see if JT Woods plays in this game, right? Can use the reps, but also has definitely solidified his roster spot. He's not going anywhere at this point. He's played well in the first two preseason games.
He has.
And now he's a very key part of your depth. So it'll be interesting to see how much.
It's crazy how quickly things turn, man.
Man, it is.
Crazy.
But it does feel like they'll probably keep at least four safeties on the squad. It's been four. Yeah. I mean, last year it was four. The year before that, they rolled it out there with Derwin James, Nazir Adderley, and just Alohi Gilman. So we have seen a little bit of precedent for that. But Brandon Staley uses three guys. That means that leaves you with no reserve pieces that aren't seeing the field at all. And now you have Raheem Lane and Mark Webb, who are interesting for totally different reasons. Mark Webb was a 7th round pick originally 2 years ago, and then Raheem Lane came in as an undrafted free agent last year. And we haven't seen Mark Webb in the regular season since 2021, but we did see Raheem Lane last year get a handful of snaps with the team when they were dealing with injuries of their own, Derwin James suspension, all of those things. So, David, this feels like a battle that is still raging. I mean, I feel like there's pretty much every outcome could happen here. One guy makes it. If neither guy makes it, seems least likely, or both guys make it, but it feels like it's all kind of on the table still.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think this is one of the battles that you have to really pay close attention to because they're of the lack of separation. I mean, both of these guys, I mean, for different reasons. I mean, Mark Webb has dealt with injuries even in this preseason game, and that was talked about by Brandon Staley. He said like it's really, really important for Mark Webb to be out there. He said he's got to play in the next game. This is going to be a great game for him against the 49ers. Head coach Kyle Shanahan and his group and the way they play. I think it's an important evaluation for Mark, but I'm glad he's going to be out there for this game. And he said it right there. It's an important evaluation for him. He's got to be out there. And I know this, and I firmly believe Mark Webb is a favorite of Brandon Staley. I think Brandon Staley wants to find a way to get Mark Webb on this roster and utilize him because I feel like he is a defensive back that's more versatile. But, Raheem Lane is a guy that's been rock steady. I mean, he's been available, and both of these guys factor in pretty prominently on special teams as well. So, I mean, that's a part of this equation. But, yeah, I think this is one of the battles where it actually could something could end up happening based on the results of this last preseason game.
Well, it does also feel like if there is a loser of this and the Chargers only keep four safeties, that whatever other guy is going to be on the practice squad. It feels like, Ryan or AJ Finley at this point is out of that race. I mean, that's just kind of what it looks like from the outside looking in. If both these guys make it, maybe he sticks around on the practice squad, right? But as we're seeing it right now, it feels like it's one of these two guys. Maybe both of these guys, but neither one has done enough to solidify it going into this game. This is a very important game for both of them. Special teams is a very important part of it. So far, Raheem Lane has 2 missed tackles on special teams and 0 actual tackles. And then the game, he has 2 catches on 4 targets allowed for only 18 yards, and he has 5 tackles in the 2 games. Mark Webb has 0 tackles and 2 missed tackles defensively, right? None of those are good numbers.
No.
Didn't play in the second preseason game, which hurts. And he had no regular season snaps in 2022. He's just been around on the practice squad, has never really found that. But it feels like for this position, David, it could go one of 2 ways, and I think a lot of it has to do with the cornerback position too. Maybe, there's 5 corners that we know are locks to make the team. Dean Leonard and Jasir Taylor as the reserves, and Asante Samuel Jr., Michael Davis, and J.C. Jackson all being locks, all 5 of those guys. They could keep 6 corners. Maybe they give someone like Tywan Mullen a shot. Maybe they give Cam Brown a shot, 2 guys that have had really good moments in preseason. or maybe they decide to go and keep 5 safeties. But it feels like it's one of those two. It's either going to be 6 corners or potentially 5 safeties with whoever that last guy in is at either spot playing a ton of special teams.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, special teams is going to factor into that decision for sure. I mean, it's either the last corner or the last safety. That's the spot when I look at this roster I'm not sure of, and I think that's where this last preseason game will factor into the evaluation. Is somebody going to be able to stick out enough to be able to force the Chargers' hand and make them have to take that extra safety or take that extra corner? And I like Tywan Mullen. I think he's a feisty guy that has played well and has made plays as soon as he's entered the game in each of the first 2 preseason games. And Cam Brown, I feel like, has been pretty solid. He's got that prototypical size on the outside for a corner that I know that the Chargers like. So this is a big one. I mean, this one I'm going to be watching very, very closely. But again, I do feel like, either way, one of these guys will end up on the practice squad. And I feel like the practice squad is shaping up to look a lot more competitive because the depth on this team is a lot more competitive.
Yeah, I think between the 2 last corners, I think Cam Brown had the better first game. I mean, 2 pass breakups. He only allowed 3 catches on 6 targets, passer rating allowed of 56.9. And then in the second game, gave up 2 catches on 2 targets, whereas Tywan Mullen gave up 70 yards in the first game and then bounced back and played a lot better in the second game. So it'll be interesting to see. But speaking of special teams, Brandon Staley didn't hear the podcast where we talked about all of the battles that were over already during the offseason.
Come on, Coach.
That we did last week. I mean, he should have listened. And I think we might be about to call Brandon Staley a liar. And this is about Cameron Dicker versus Dustin Hopkins, because he was asked in his press conference on Wednesday if the decision had been made about a starting kicker. And he said, we have not. And then he asked about if either one of them or both of them would play in the San Francisco game. And he said, we're going to make that determination here before we leave for San Francisco. So, David, he's saying this is still an open competition. He said when Dustin Hopkins came back, he was excited for the competition to get started. But to me, it still just feels like it's over. Like, maybe this is a showcase for Dustin Hopkins to show himself for another team or something. But, like, it just feels like it would be a monumental upset right now if Cameron Dicker is not the starting kicker for this team.
Brandon Staley also said that Mike Williams was going to be day-to-day after the Denver Broncos game. Well, guess what? That wasn't the case. So, no, I don't believe it for a second. Yeah. Dicker the kicker is the Chargers kicker. I feel like that's just it, set in stone. He has proved that. He has been just consistent the entire off-season program. And that's all you're looking for. I think he's a young kicker. I think he is an accurate kicker. He's made some big kicks for you in the past. I know it sucks for Dustin Hopkins, but
it does.
I just feel like Dicker the kicker has done enough to be able to secure this spot. I feel like he's the kicker, and I feel like that decision's already been made, whether Brandon Staley wants to admit it or not.
I think he's showing respect to a veteran, right?
I agree.
I think he is showing outwardly into this team, like, hey, you lost your job because of injury. I'm going to give you every chance to go win it back. I just don't think you can do it in one preseason game. I mean, he had like a 25-yard field goal and an extra point last week in the other preseason game. That's not going to sway you one way or the other.
In your sleep. Yeah.
100%. This is the thing. Per Eric Smith, the team reporter, Cameron Dicker is 62 of 68 during training camp this year. He's also perfect in the preseason games as well when the lights are on. That's 91.2%. That's
consistent.
Insane. That's like the highest accuracy in the league, and obviously 68 kicks is much more than he'll kick this year. He's not going to kick 68 field goals. God forbid. Like, that would be awful.
He better not.
And it does feel like there was kind of a turning point in the joint practices for me, because Dustin Hopkins in a 2-minute drill had 2 different opportunities at a 47-yard field goal to win the game, proverbially.
Couldn't hit him.
Proverbially. He couldn't, and he missed both of them. One he missed short, one he pushed wide. So I think that, to me, that was kind of the last nail in the coffin, but I hope Dustin Hopkins can show what he can do and latch on with someone else, because he is still the best kicker the Chargers have had in a long time.
And he won the game for the Chargers on one leg.
Exactly, but 2 injuries now, an older guy out of the 2 of them now. I mean, it's a little bit more concerning. But that is going to wrap things up for today's show. A little programming note, we will not be with you guys tomorrow morning, because we're going to save that Friday show for a post game right after the Chargers play their final preseason game on Friday night. Stay up, Chargers late night, locked on style, and we can't wait to bring that to you guys. To make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, where you can follow along live after the game and get our reactions, talk about who made their mark. And also, you can find the show every day on all of our social media. You can find me on X at Dan Talk Sports and David Drogemeyer at DroTalkSD, as well as the show's page at Locked On LAC. You can also find us on Instagram at Locked On Chargers and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. We are so excited. It's the preseason, but this is the last step before we get to see real football. So super excited to have a rare Friday night show with you guys this week, and make sure you are back here with us for that. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.